Clements and John Musker are the legendary team behind The Great Mouse Detective, The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, Treasure Planet, The Princess and the Frog, and Moana. And of course, their stories defined a wonderful Disney era and that shaped so many childhoods and inspired so many of us. And on a personal note, when I was 5 years old, the first time I went into a movie theater back in Italy, it was to watch The Little Mermaid. And the lights went down and got transported and pulled under the sea and met Ariel in The Little Mermaid. There was a moment I felt, I fell in love with animation and with Ariel as well. That was my first celebrity crush, I would say. My wife is still jealous. But anyway, we have a little video from our Right for Animation YouTube channel, and we're going to play it now before welcoming our amazing duo on stage.
That of the screenwriter is the most fundamental, the most basic, and the loneliest.
Thank you. So we have this room full of storytellers. So if you love animation, if you love storytelling, let Ron and Joe know with a wonderful, great, and loud applause. Welcome to the stage, Ron Clements and John Musker.
I always like this setup because I feel like we're at a Senate hearing here. Mr. President, we feel that the funding is very behind schedule. Okay.
Was that Nixon?
I don't know who that was.
I didn't know who it was.
No,
either,
that was a senator from Wyoming. That was
okay.
Alan Simpson.
So good to be here.
Yes, that is Ron. For those of you who don't know,
thanks,
and this is
Pietro.
a caricature that I did many years ago. And Ron's the guy on the left. I am on the right. John. We used to have a memory device that we used because Ron, back in the day, had red hair. So he'd say, "I'm Ron, red."
I wouldn't say that. Other people would
I
say
know.
that so they could remember.
But so we can't really do that anymore for obvious reasons. So I came up with a new one. So Ron starts with R. That's for rickety. And I am John J. I couldn't find a good J one, but it sounds like J, geriatric. So I think between the two, that's the way you can tell us apart. So we're here to talk about story and script writing and the whole process. We're not going to be showing any clips. We're going to really just be talking about the writing process and our experience on these films and the various aspects of it. I wanted to just start out a little bit by saying, which may be a little scary, and I think many of you in the room already know this, but of all the phases of animation production that we've been involved in, writing, directing, and you're animating, you're producing the film, you're working with art directors, I think writing the story is the hardest of all of those. But it's also the most crucial and the most critical because all of those other areas, in terms of animation and art direction and all that, they all grow out of the story and they support the telling of the story. So if your story is up for grabs or it's not locked in, you have a hard time making decisions on some of those other areas because they really are dependent on that. So that's a little preamble, but Ron, take it away.
Okay. So of course, I think probably in terms of the films that we've done, we're probably best known as directors, but actually we were very involved with developing the stories of pretty much all the films that we've done and picking the stories. I actually pitched The Little Mermaid, The Great Mouse Detective, and Treasure Planet, and John pitched the idea that became the basis for Moana, and I think we've written the first drafts in terms of the first draft scripts or screenplays on all the films we've done, and sometimes multiple drafts. And someone may ask, what is the essential difference between the writer and the director? And to oversimplify, I would say that the writer creates the story and the director tells the story. And in a lot of cases, the telling of the story can be even more important than the story itself. But today, we're going to focus on developing stories of the movies that we made, our process, not necessarily anybody else's, but this is how we did it. And beginning, I think, with Part one, finding the story. What do we look for in terms of what we think would actually make a good story for an animated film? And my finger went too fast. Okay, so there are a lot of things we look for, but one of the first things we look for that we like, that John and I both like, is fantasy. We're big fans of fantasy and magic. We're the guys who actually turned down Lion King because we thought it was too naturalistic.
Who'd want to see a movie about lions in Africa? No one, right? Well.
But we love things like underwater magical sea kingdoms with mermaids and talking fish. We like magical shape-shifting genies and magic carpet rides. I'll get used to this.
Pilot error here, I'm sorry.
And we like big, epic mythology movies, or ideas like Greek mythology and Polynesian mythology, and space fantasy and dark magic like voodoo. All those things appeal to us.
One of the other things that we look for are immersive worlds, really someplace to take the audience that transports them to another world of whatever kind. Some are more naturalistic, some are more ones we've experienced, but even, for example, Little Mermaid, taking the audience under the sea. In fact, when I got on the movie, Ron had invited me to write on the movie, I felt at the beginning that we should start on the surface and not start right away underwater. The earlier treatments had started already under the surface because I felt like it was kind of like going to Oz, and I felt like we really wanted to literally immerse the audience, but not right away. We didn't want to throw it away too fast. Of course, we went to space, and Treasure Planet, the Ethereum, was this thing we created. We really wanted to have a rich, this kind of retro steampunky thing where, you know, sailing ships, solar ships could sail in the sky, and you didn't have to have a helmet on, so we tried to invent this Ethereum that you could breathe in. I don't think everyone got the concept necessarily, but that was our...
It was a fantasy universe.
Fantasy universe, a retro fantasy.
It was not the past or the future.
Right. And certainly in a movie like Moana, where we really, you know, we wanted to introduce people to the South Pacific that didn't know about it. We ourselves had never been to the South Pacific before we really dug in and did our research trip and all that.
We've been to Hawaii, but that was different.
That doesn't count, I think. One of the, and it's such a rich landscape in the Pacific, both the people and the islands, and we really wanted to, you know, bring the audience into that world. Years ago, the producer of The Black Cauldron, Joe Hale, had an analogy for the films that we make, and I like the analogy, and I've used it since, and he compared them to tree houses. Now, I have built an actual tree house in my backyard for my kids, and it's still there, although it's somewhat dilapidated at this point, but I really like tree houses, and I do think that was a good analogy, because like tree houses are a place of sort of adventure and of fun, and there's an element of kind of the unknown, and you get to see the world from a different vantage point. You know, go up in a treehouse, and even you look at from the backyard of my own house, you see it from an angle you've never seen it before, and I think that's, Joe was right, this is what the movies are. They're a way of seeing the world from sort of a different vantage point. The other thing that we always like to stress is that these movies are told visually. It's visual storytelling. We really don't want to have a movie that's just a bunch of talking heads. We really like to be able to turn off the soundtrack, really, and we think of it almost like a silent film, that it should communicate graphically and visually. These are the characters, these are the issues, these are the themes, these are the moods that we're trying to convey and the emotions. In fact, years ago, I heard the great director Chuck Jones, the great Warner Brothers director, said when he would go on an airplane and they would be showing a movie, he would initially not sort of get the headphones and just watch it with no track, just to see, am I getting a story? Am I getting involved in this? And if he was, then he'd put on the headphones and watch the remainder of it. We sort of thought of our films that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And but once we kind of settled on an idea, a subject matter that we want to turn into a movie, pretty much the first thing we get into, there's a deep dive into research. We read a lot of books and magazine articles and go to museums and watch a lot of movies. And a lot of the movies that we did were before the internet, so we had to visit the library a lot. But what is really one of the greatest things about research is to be able to travel and visit some of the places that relate to the movie you're trying to make. Unfortunately for us, it took a while before we were able to do that. On The Great Mouse Detective, I really, really wanted to go to London, where Sherlock Holmes solved all his mysteries, and to even go inside Big Ben and see how those clockworks actually worked, but we didn't have the budget for that, so we never got to go. We did a little bit on Mermaid, but not that much better. I think we were able to at least visit an aquarium at Monterey.
In California, the Monterey Aquarium. That was as close as we got to Copenhagen.
And then on Aladdin, just as we were beginning Aladdin, the Mideast War broke out, the Gulf War, and at that time, our movie took place in Baghdad, so traveling was pretty much out of the question, but fortunately, our head of layout, Rasul Azadani, who is from Isfahan in Iran, during the war, he was actually able to return to his hometown, where he took a ton of pictures and did paintings like this based on one of the pictures he took. But he took so many pictures that he got in trouble. He almost got arrested. We weren't sure.
They thought he was photographing military installations.
Yeah, we weren't even sure if he could make it back or his pictures could make it back.
He was literally stopped at the airport, and he had to really do some fast talking to get his thousands of pictures through. He fortunately did.
But he returned, thankfully.
Yes, he did. And we, of course, the only thing we did at the time, there was a Saudi Arabian Expo in the LA Convention Center. That's as close as we got to the Middle East. So, but we did go, our first sort of big trip was on Hercules back in 1995. We went to both Greece and Turkey. This is a shot of the team, and it wasn't just Ron and I, but there was the whole sort of creative nucleus of the team. You can see from the right there, that's Andy Gaskell, our production designer, and Tom Cardone, our head of background next to him. In the pink shirt is David Zippel, our lyricist. Alice Dewey, our producer, in the center. Rasul in the middle. And then you see Barry Johnson, head of story. Roger Gould, Ron smiling with his red hair. That's Khan, also known as the John Belushi of animation, Turkish story man with his head on Ron's shoulder. And I'm in the background there. It was a great trip, but because we had developed most of the story by the time we got there, this became almost more of a location scout, and we saw various sites that we took photos of, we did drawings of, that worked their way into the movie, sort of into the story, but more so into the way it looked. For example, we saw this great field of poppies that I'm ensconced in, and that became a scene in Go the Distance where young Hercules is walking through this field of poppies. We saw this amphitheater in Olympia, Greece, and we used that when Hades is watching Hercules get his feet put into cement. And then we go on to...
Actually, on Princess and the Frog, actually, we were able to do our first research trip actually before we started writing the script. So a lot of the things we encountered on that trip made its way into the movie. Our first trip was just a few months after Katrina, so we also saw a lot of devastation, and we went to the Ninth Ward, which was pretty overwhelming. But what we see here, the French Quarter with St. Louis Cathedral, which is overlooking Jackson Square, that was pretty much unscathed. And it was there around Jackson Square that we were with development executive Maggie Malone, and she had a tarot card reader read her fortune. And he told her that she was destined to kiss a few frogs before she found her prince. But actually, now Maggie is happily married to Matt Shankman, who directed some great Game of Thrones episodes, WandaVision, and just recently did the Fantastic Four. So there you go.
So that guy with the purple hair knew what he was talking about.
I think he did.
That's great.
We also got to ride on a Mardi Gras float, which is really an experience. You got to try it sometime. It's like the crowd is absolutely crazy. They're fanatic. They're yelling, throw me the beads, throw me the beads. You're trying to throw beads to everybody as fast as you can. You feel like almost like a rock star, but it's fleeting. We toured the bayou. We actually even met the voodoo queen of New Orleans who took us to her voodoo temple. This is a picture of that. But the big takeaway, I think, of all the stuff we encountered was that city was principally about music and about food. And we knew we wanted to have a lot of both of those things in our movie.
The research trip that really was the most impactful in terms of developing a story was the one that we took for the movie Moana. We had originally pitched, I had thought of trying to do a movie in that setting. I love the setting. I had never been there. I read books that were set there, you know, by Herman Melville and Joseph Conrad in that general area, and seen paintings by Gauguin. But that led me to discover, I thought, well, is there some kind of mythology that goes with Polynesia? And I discovered there's a huge, rich vein of mythology, particularly the character of Maui. This shapeshifter, you know, he could pull up islands with his magical fish hook. He seemed like he was made for animation. So we pitched a very simple storyline to John Lasseter, built on a few myths that we read, just almost a sentence or two. He loved that, he loved the setting, but he said, you've got to go there and really do a deeper dive into the culture before you resolve your story. So we went, back in 2011, we went on like a 2-week trip that our development executive, Jessica Julius, and Maggie Malone particularly, set up for us, where they really connected us with the deeper cultural ambassadors of the area, and not the superficial things. You know, Ron did get pulled into one floor show where he had to dance at a hotel, but other than that, we were really finding out more deeper lessons about the culture, and we met the people you see in this slide who profoundly impacted the story and the characters of the movie. For example, one of the things we learned there was their pride in being the world's great navigators, the first navigators, how they could sail using dead reckoning, find their way across the ocean. Navigation didn't factor in our original story whatsoever, but now we saw it was crucial to that culture. We met the gentleman on the right, you see there, his name is Angel Berra. He's a Fijian fisherman and sailor. He's
navigator.
He's a navigator, and he's sailing. Ron is just off stage in that picture. He took us out on his thamakau, which is a sailboat where it shunts. They actually move the sail from one end of the thing.
And we actually crossed the reef.
We crossed the reef, but the big thing, he talked about the ocean as if it were alive, as if it had feelings, and that you had to respect the ocean, and if you didn't, it would take you, and he would sort of commune with the ocean, and both Ron and I wrote in our notes, we've got to make the ocean a character in this movie. It's so real here, it has feelings. The woman in the lower left there, sitting next to me there, lovely woman, Hinano Murphy, she married an Irish guy from Glendale, but Hinano was the head of a Polynesian Cultural Association, and we met with her on Moorea, and we heard all this great stuff about sort of the importance of family and the culture and these amazing moving stories. And we heard from Sam, one of the advisors there, who said, one of the things you have to do is you have to know your mountain. If you don't know your mountain, you don't know who you are. Your mountain is your past, your history, your culture, your family, and it applies to navigation as well. If you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. So all of these lessons we came away with, the ocean, connecting people, not dividing them. We pitched those things to John Lasseter when we came back, and he said, I've never had a research trip that so transformed the people that went there as yours. And we felt very bonded to the people we met with and felt like we have to make a movie that they would be proud to see. We really felt like we owe it to them. And so they became our advisors throughout the movie. Some of these pictures are from later visits even, where we came back, we had script readings, we showed them our animation as we were getting into it, we changed things. Maui was originally bald, and they said, no, Maui's mana is rooted literally in his long hair. You can't do him bald. So we said, yes, okay. And so we gave him hair, but it was really, and the story changed completely. Moana wasn't even in the story at the beginning. We heard that word when we were there. It meant ocean. Ron said, what if we call our heroine Moana? And we built it around navigation. And the whole story reoriented itself. We changed course because of that trip.
Yeah, it was a great trip and very emotional for us. I'd say really a life-changing experience. But now, going further now, we've done our research, we've got our subject matter. Now we're going to start to build all this into an actual story. And one of the first things actually that we focus on is this idea of our characters, creating characters that are really going to have great personalities and be entertaining and the audience can relate to and that come alive to the audience. In some ways, we feel like the characters really are even more important than the story, and it's hard. We work really hard to come up with great characters. If you ask, like, how do we do it? How do we do it? There's a lot of ways to do it. Sometimes we base characters on people we know, on friends or relatives, or just people we encounter that seem interesting. And sometimes we try to avoid stereotypes, but sometimes actually you can have a stereotype and then add a little twist to it, and that can make an interesting character. For example, with this guy, with our crab character, Sebastian, actually in our first treatments, we had a crab who was the court composer for the king, but he was a very stuffy British type.
And his name was Clarence.
Yes, his name was Clarence, and it was Howard Ashman. One of his first ideas that he brought to the movie was, what if the crab is Rastafarian? And we didn't know what that meant. We were a little confused. But then we realized it was the idea of wanting to bring calypso elements into the music. But then we thought, but if the crab's Caribbean, doesn't that mean he's got to be kind of laid back and easygoing? And it was like, no, we could still have him be pompous and dignified. And he related to, there was a Joffrey Holder was doing 7-Up commercials at the time that nobody remembers about the Uncola nut. But he was a Jamaican character who was very dignified and grand, and that was how Sebastian came about. And I think, even to this day, to me, I think he's one of our best characters. Sometimes it's kind of a gumbo, it's kind of a mixture or a soup where we take elements from different people and we combine them together. For example, with Mama Odie here, she's sort of a combo of 3 people, 3 women. One of them is Colleen Sally, who we first met on that first trip in New Orleans. She's kind of a legendary storyteller, and here she is in a tent at the New Orleans Jazz Fest, reading stories to an entranced group of kids. She had a great sort of peppery personality and would say things like, y'all ain't got the sense you was born with, and which made its way in. And so there's a lot of Colleen, but also we met Ava K. Jones, who was an actual voodoo priestess who has a pet snake that she dances with. And here we are in the St. Louis cemetery. So there's a lot of Ava K there. And then finally, this is a comedian named Moms Mabley, who John and I kind of knew from the 60s. We knew her growing up. She was hilarious. So there's also Moms Mabley in Mama Odie. And even Jennifer Lewis, who did the voice of Mama Odie, sort of channeled Jennifer Lewis. So Mama Odie was a gumbo. But sometimes you just meet that character right away. This is Reggie, who was our tour guide for our Bayou tour guide, and he's Cajun. And he took us out into the middle of the swamp where a bunch of alligators were kind of surrounding our boat, and he fed them marshmallows. He kind of held them up, and the alligators would jump out of the water and eat the marshmallows out of his hand. And he said, like, you could tell the good tour guides from the bad tour guides by how many fingers they got left. And I think
he had all his fingers.
He did,
Yeah.
but not all of his teeth. But John and I kind of looked at each other, and it's like, we found Ray. We found Ray, and that was...
Ray was Reggie, and Reggie was Ray. And in fact, we invited Reggie to the premiere when we had it in New Orleans, and he loved it. He was all in on that. We also, at times, we actually write characters with a specific voice actor in mind. We don't always do that. On many characters we don't, but on some we have. For example, obviously, the Genie with Robin Williams. When we wrote the script for that, thank you, Robin. When we wrote the script for that, it was our idea at the outset, what if we got Robin? We had seen Back to Neverland. We'd seen many Robin movies and seen him in shows and all that, and he was fabulous. And we saw an animated film, Back to Neverland, that our friend Jerry Reese made for the Florida studio, where Robin gets turned into an animated character, and they do a lot of fast changes, like in the Duck-a-Muck short that Chuck Jones did. So we wrote the character with all these fast changes built into the script. We didn't know if Robin would do it. Fortunately, we got to show him our storyboards. Eric Kohlberg did some test animation. He came in, he loved it, and he was going to do it. Now, during the course of the film, they were wrangling about the contract a little bit. So Jeffrey Katzenberg came to us about halfway through, and he said, who's your second choice? You know, who do you got behind Robin? We're like, Jeffrey, there is no one. It's Robin or nothing. He didn't want to hear that. From a negotiating point of view, you don't want to know. You've only got one choice. But so they worked it out, and fortunately Robin stayed in the movie, and he was unbelievable to work with, fantastic. When we did the movie Hercules, we had this character, Philoctetes, who was the trainer of heroes, and he was kind of like a Burgess Meredith Rocky fight trainer. Burgess Meredith was dead at the time, but we wrote it with this guy in mind, Danny DeVito. But again, the bigger the actor, they won't audition for you. And we always like to audition actors because sometimes they come across great when you see their picture, but when you just hear their voice, it doesn't communicate as well. So we auditioned like 100 actors for Phil before we went with Danny. And in fact, one of them, even Red Buttons, a classical comedian, came in and read it, and he said, you know what? I can tell you right now who's going to get this part. Danny DeVito is going to get this part. We said, no. And then, of course, 2 weeks later, Danny DeVito got the part. We wrote Captain Amelia in Treasure Planet with Emma Thompson in mind, the great Emma Thompson, great British actress. These were some of my most fun recording sessions because she's the only actor, I think, in all our time who actually came to the session not just improvising, but having written out alternate lines for some of her things, which is very much in character for Emma. She's a great writer. And so one of my favorite memories is sitting there eating our little cucumber sandwiches in the control room in London while we're mulling over the script. And I had a line in there where she's deriding the crew of the ship. You know, she says, these are a sorry gaggle of ragamuffins, which I thought was okay. And I was saying, yeah, that's fine. But I think we could make it a bit more pointed. What if it was a ludicrous parcel of driveling galoots? And I was like, Emma, that is the line. We are going with the galoots. And we did that on a number of lines. She said, hey, I had a great idea before coffee, didn't I? What was that idea, Mr. Ara? And that was all Emma. So a fabulous experience with her. We have occasionally written for a specific actor that we didn't get, and the famous one we've talked about in the past is this man, Jack Nicholson, who we wanted to get for Hades, the villain in Hercules, and again, he wouldn't audition, but he was willing to come in, so we brought his.
But we wrote our script specifically for Jack.
We wrote it in his voice. We said it the lines, picturing him saying them. He came in, he saw the artwork on the walls. He brought his little daughter, Lorraine, who at that time was only about 3, and and she was dressed as Snow White, her favorite character. So he made sure to have all the Snow White merchandise there, to woo him. And he's like, "Look at the pretty pictures, Rain. Isn't this great? Yeah, wow." And you can see on the right, that's a drawing that Gerald Scarf, our production designer, did when we were considering Jack as Hades. That didn't happen though, because Jack wanted to have a deal like his Batman deal where he got a percentage of the merchandise, and Disney would not do that. So we wound up with James Woods, who we love and who played it completely differently, and probably we were lucky we got James because Jack's delivery tended to be kind of slow. And James Woods, hey, come on, I got a thing, whatever. And he was, 10 times faster. So I think we'd still be watching the movie right now if we had gotten Jack. We hadn't got Jack. Now, sometimes we base our characters on other characters we've seen in films. And in this case, Meg in Hercules, we were strongly influenced by the Barbara Stanwyck character in the great Preston Sturges live-action film, The Lady Eve, which was made, I think, in 1941, somewhere around there. And she plays sort of a femme fatale. She's on an ocean liner that Henry Fonda, a very rich alcohol baron, is there, and she's going to set her hooks, and she and her father are going to try and bilk him out of his money. And she's got this great Preston Sturges sardonic dialogue, and she's kind of seducing. Of course, she falls in love with him against her instincts, and that was really the foundation of Meg. When we wrote Meg, we sort of pictured her voice in our head.
Yeah, for whatever reason, we were thinking of Hercules as kind of a screwball comedy. And one of the other influences, I was a big fan of Frank Capra, who also did screwball comedies like The Lady Eve, and of course did It's a Wonderful Life and Meet John Doe, so many great films. But a lot of his films were made during the Great Depression, which was a really dark time where a lot of people had lost hope. And it seemed like heroes are most important in times like that. That's when you need heroes the most, is when people are losing hope. Like Jimmy Stewart was a great hero in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, kind of naive and kind of innocent, but idealistic. And so Jimmy Stewart was really our model for Hercules. So that's how we kind of came up with Herc and Meg. We're also big fans of pantomime characters that don't speak, that express what they're thinking through their gestures and physicality. And that goes back to the beginning of Disney with characters like Dopey and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Dumbo and Tinkerbell and even we both started as animators. One of the first exercises you do sometimes as an animator at Disney, the idea is to take a flour sack and try to give it a personality. And of course, that's kind of what we did with the magic carpet, and characters like Morph and Pegasus, and certainly the ocean. It's like, how do you give the ocean a personality and make it a character? And we kind of had to figure that out along with a pig and a rooster and a tattoo, one of Maui's tattoos that kind of came to life and had its own personality.
And of course, equal with trying to develop these heroes, we're trying to develop villains that would, engage the audience. Of course, they're fun to write, they're fun for the actors to play, they're fun for the animators to animate, and they're sort of an engine for the story. Their drive often fuels a lot of the plot points, and it seems like in today's world, villains have gone out of favor in animated films to a certain extent. A lot of them, they don't feel like they want a villain, or maybe they feel like it's too cliched, but we're fans of villains, and we feel like the audience enjoys their villainy. And Hitchcock, I think, once said that you can make your protagonist, the stronger you make your villain, your protagonist has to become that much stronger in order to sort of be on an equal footing with him. So I think we always felt that way, that if we can strengthen the villains, we'll strengthen our leads as well. And certainly in the case of Ursula, we really, in the original Anderson story, which Ron read and adapted, she's sort of almost an incidental character. She's in the middle of the story, and it's a crucial plot point that she changes Ariel, but she only appears in that one scene. And one of Ron's first instincts was, no, let's make her a villain. Let's have her carry through the story and be in direct opposition to the king and to Ariel, and factor even into the third act of the film. And I think the film is better for that. Of course, other classic films, what would 101 Dalmatians be without, Cruella de Vil, the great Cruella de Vil, animated by Mark Davis and storyboarded by Bill Peet and voiced by Betul Gerson. It wouldn't be at all the same movie. And of course, we had Jafar, and there was the evil stepmother. And I did notice when I put this slide together that I think they went to the same tailor. I'm not sure. We learned a lesson when we were making these films, a lesson we tried to apply whenever we could, which was, and we can give you this, it's a trade secret, and please don't tell everyone where you've heard this deep, dark secret, but it's our helpful villain advice, which is when you're in doubt about the villain, base him on your boss. And we did this a few times.
It's true. It's happened a few times.
We rarely told the boss we were doing that, though. But and so in the case of the Great Mouse Detective, we had a villain, Ratigan, who was a rat who wanted to be thought of as a mouse. He was ashamed of his rat-like origins, but we drew him as kind of a skinny guy. And then Glenn Keane, the animator, the great Glenn Keane. Yes, let's hear it for Glenn Keane. Glenn said, the producer of our movie is Ron Miller. Ron Miller is this man. He was 6'5". He was a former football player at USC and for the LA Rams. He was a mesomorph. He was built like a brick wall.
He was not evil.
He was not evil, and he didn't think of himself as a mouse. But we were basing it on his look, not his personality. But actually, Glenn just thought, it's so intimidating when you come down the hall, boom, 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 to go one of our meetings, and he looked so great in a suit. Glenn was like, why don't we make Ratigan like Ron Miller? So that's what we did. So this is really sort of Ron Miller crossed with, the rodent world. And we never told Ron Miller about it. Years later, he sort of found out about it, and he was very good-natured about it, fortunately for us. Which brings us to now.
And there were, I think you could say there's, in Hades, there might be just a touch of Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Yes, Jeffrey. There was. I mean, we added, Jeffrey, Hades didn't originally say guys, but we had to put that in there as our homage to Jeffrey. And, so there's certainly a touch of Jeffrey, maybe even a little Peter Schneider, for those of you who know Peter Schneider. In part two here, we're going to talk about making this work, really the script writing process itself. We wanted to talk about writing as a team, really, because Ron and I were a team. And some of these marriages where they put, directors are working together or writers are working together, sometimes they have been imposed by the studio, and they sort of, they're forced marriages. They put so-and-so together with so-and-so. I like to say that our marriage was self-inflicted. But Ron actually came to me during Little Mermaid. We had written together, but separately on Great Mouse, and he had written this treatment, was developing, had pitched out the idea of Little Mermaid. They were trying to get a live-action writer to write the script. It wasn't working out, and Ron said, I think we could write it. Are you interested in writing this with me? And I loved the idea, and I jumped at it. And that became sort of the basis of us writing as a team. And
before we directed as a team.
Yeah, and so we, we would pitch these ideas very simply. We might have a board just full of a couple of drawings or something like that, and then that would get developed a little further. Sometimes then we would start working on more of a written outline, kind of a log line that was just maybe a page long. That might turn into treatments where we actually, it could be 5 pages, it could be 10 pages, it could be 40 pages, where you really get into more the story itself, the characters, with not a ton of dialogue, but with just enough to sort of give you a feeling of it. And then eventually that would evolve into a script. And in between all that, we would have beat boards where we would actually block out the story visually, just in a board of like, say, 50 drawings, so we can tell the whole story.
We used up a lot of index cards.
Yes, a lot of index cards a lot of trees were felled in the process of making these movies. But so in terms of our actual script writing process, now we have an outline that we've agreed on and we've talked through in the characters now. Ron, and what was great is our writing team, we had different strengths, so we played to our own separate strengths. So Ron is really great with structure and with sincerity and warmth. I'm a little bit more comedy-oriented and dialogue-oriented, business and that sort of thing. So, and Ron likes to have material to sort of edit and shape. So what we would do is I would go ahead and write first. So I would take our outline and start with scene 1, and I would write it, and I would write it 6 or 8 or 10 different ways. I'd kind of improvise on paper, and in fact, I wrote longhand. I never have learned how to type very well. So I would do the scene all those ways. I'd feed it to Ron, and unless he was changing the storyline, he didn't want to show me anything he was doing until he had gone all the way through the script. So it wouldn't be until 12 weeks later, after he'd gotten all these various
John would
scenes.
give, like...
Yeah. I would write 500 pages to get a 100-page script, but and I didn't really edit myself. I really went, well, let's try. What if we did this? What if we tried this little thing here? So much so that when Ron finally then, unless he was changing the story,
I worked on a word processor, and I would start fade in and really start writing
in script form, but if he read all those versions of mine and he didn't like any of them, he was free to invent something completely different, use part of mine, do his thing, and so it was very much an organic process. Of course, at the end of the process, when he showed me the script and I read it pretty fresh because I didn't remember a lot of what I'd written, so much so that sometimes I would say, why didn't you use my part on this? And he said, that is your part. I'm like, really? And I'd have to, I did write that. Okay.
Yeah, it was like a brand new script to John.
It was bizarre, but I think it was a little bit like playing the piano. He was left-handed and I was right-handed, and out of that
and I am left-handed.
And I'm right-handed. So out of that kind of symbiosis, there came something that I think was better than either one of us could have done individually. I think there was sort of a fusion there.
And in terms of building the screenplay now, we are proponents of the sort of classic 3-act structure. Where we begin with Act 1. And as an example, I'm going to go through The Little Mermaid to kind of show how we structured The Little Mermaid. But this actually, in some ways, with some breaks, this is similar to pretty much all of our films. Act 1 is kind of setting up all the dominoes, setting everything up, and particularly setting up what all our main characters want. That's so important. Like we have a mermaid who is fascinated with the human world and kind of wants to be human. But we have her father, the Sea King, who hates humans and doesn't want his daughter to have anything to do with them. So there's conflict right there. Then we have a handsome young prince who's kind of a romantic and dreams of meeting the right girl. And then we have our villain, the Sea Witch, who has been banished from the Sea King's kingdom and wants revenge. And then toward the end of Act 1, we have what's called the inciting incident. That's where you start the dominoes going. And in this case, we had, I think, a really good inciting incident where the mermaid actually saves this prince from drowning. And now what's going to happen? And that leads us to Act 2, where we're trying to tighten, we're trying to build dramatic tension. Now, seems like this mermaid has actually fallen in love with this prince, and that's a complication, and it leads to a pretty dramatic confrontation with her father, where he destroys her grotto, which leads to our midpoint. I think our midpoint of Act 2, in this case, is pretty strong. This is where our mermaid makes a deal with our sea witch and has her chance to get everything she wants. but it's dangerous, and we have a ticking clock. She's only got 3 days. And what we tend to like to do is as we continue toward the end of the second act, is to kind of tease the audience. She's getting closer, she's getting closer. Is she gonna get it? Is he gonna kiss her? Is he gonna kiss her? And then we pull the rug out from under the audience. No, he's going to marry a different girl, and all her hopes are dashed. This is what we would call our all is lost moment. We always like to end Act 2 with an all is lost moment, and we pretty much did, and all of that leads to our third act, where it turns out it's not hopeless. There's still a chance. And that's where we try to pay off everything that we set up and have kind of a cerebral climax leading up to our happy ending. And what we try to do with endings is to, at least in some way, surprise the audience. Something happens that you don't expect, that you don't see coming. Like, you don't hopefully see that the Sea King is going to break all of his rules and actually turn his daughter human because of how this whole experience has changed him. So we like to have an ending that's a little unexpected, but at the same time feels satisfying.
We wanted to talk about working with music, because music is such a big part of our films. And music that tells the story, that's the crucial thing, you know, songs that advance the story. We grew up, we were fans of musicals. We grew up watching musicals on TV and in movie theaters, and seeing, you know, school plays. And then I saw Guys and Dolls when I was like 13, and I was amazed by it at my local high school. And we like that convention of people singing. We think that there's a way of, you can sort of compress certain emotions and even plot things using music to do that. And so we were never forced to put music in any of these movies. We wanted to have it musicalized, but it was important for us always that the songs had to advance the story. If they don't advance the story or advance character, then they have to be removed from the movie. If you can take those songs that are in the film and you can take them out of the movie and still have the story make sense, that's a problem. You really shouldn't have that. I just went to a play the other day written by a friend of my wife's. The opening scene was a girl talking about all her plans of this and that. They followed that immediately with a song where she sang the same thing. And I feel like that is wrong. That is not what you want to do. You want to do one or the other. Either have that book scene or have the music scene. Fortunately, we worked with people who were very much of that point of view. Howard Ashman, the great Howard Ashman, who prided himself, yes, prided himself on, even in Little Shop, that so much of that story is all in the music. It isn't, it isn't in the book scene so much. It's in the track, the musical track. And the other thing that we did with on Mermaid is that we got them involved as early as possible. And I would recommend that to any of you out there who are working on films and that, if you can nail down who your composers are and get them working on where songs are going to go in your story, even as you're writing a script, I think it's more likely to integrate with the script and help advance the story. Even, for example, we went and met with Howard in New York. We just had a little treatment, 10 pages.
Yeah, before we wrote the script.
Before the script was ever written. And he spotted songs where he thought songs would go. We had some spots where we thought they might work, and we overlapped on some of those things. But he also came up with some new things. And basically, those spots that he identified in that 10-page treatment are what sort of remained through the course of making the film. The other great thing is when they worked on the movie, Howard moved to LA 3 weeks out of every month, and they wrote a bunch of the songs right in the same building with us. So it was very interactive with the story people and with us. You could walk by down the hall and you hear, and you open the door and there's Alan plunking away at the keys. It was really an exciting time. And even in Little Mermaid, if you take the songs, part of your world, where Ariel really stating, what she wants and dreams about, and that's followed by Under the Sea, which is sort of almost the counter argument to that. It's a counterpoint, and then that's followed by the Witch's song, where she says, "I can give you what you want." In those 3 songs, those are 3 key story points that are being addressed there. We also worked with Randy Newman, the great Randy Newman, on Princess and the Frog. Very different than Howard, a very curmudgeonly guy, very funny guy, very deadpan, droll. We discovered he had this past in New Orleans, and he spent summers there as a kid, and we wanted to do this American fairy tale set in New Orleans, and he seemed like a great choice. But the way he approached these songs was different. We played a little bit more of the Howard role in terms of spotting where the songs might go, but then to leap into these songs, he liked to see boards of drawings with just sort of inspiring images that he might work into the things. And I even wound up writing dummy lyrics to all these songs. So I would write lyrics that never appeared in any of these songs, but I would actually block out choruses and verses. For example, we knew that the Firefly was going to do a song about his girl Evangeline. And so I wrote a song. I wrote lyrics to an imaginary song called L'amour perdu, Lost Love. And he sang, and so all the lyrics had to do with how beautiful she was and how she was, and I pined for her and all that. Randy didn't use a word of that, but it helped just sort of get him going on the song. Conversely, when he wrote Friends on the Other Side, there was dialogue that he created for Facility that we loved that helped form the way we wrote his voice. And Randy had some very distinctive things in some of the interstitial things that he did that were great, that we used. When we did Moana, we had a trifecta here, but we worked with this man, Lin-Manuel Miranda. I don't know if anyone's heard of him. He's an up-and-comer. We actually...
Well, he was, when we met him, sort of.
Yeah, he was, actually. This was in 2011. Is that right when we met him? I'm getting confused now. No, 2000.
It was before Hamilton. It was definitely before Hamilton.
It was in the last century at some point. But we knew we wanted the music to be grounded in the islands. So we first started, who can we get from the islands? And actually our producer, Osnat Schurer, found Opataya Fawai, who has a band, Tavaka, which does this great roots music. I recommend it to all of you if you want something for your listening pleasure, your Spotify list, Opataya. So we talked to him via Zoom. He was really interested. He is Tovaluan and Tokalauan. He grew up on Samoa. He was really deeply immersed in the whole roots music. He was that. So we had that, but then we needed someone who did something in narrative, who could really tell a story in songs and write the character. So we met with like a dozen or more lyricist composers in New York, including Lin-Manuel Miranda, who told us, and we loved his ideas and that, very energetic. And he said he's working on this little, thing for the public theater, this hip-hop musical about the founding fathers. And we thought, okay, well, in 2 weeks when you're done with that, you should, something happened along the way. Well, amazingly, Lin is a great multitasker, so literally we would be talking to him while he was in the dressing room of Hamilton on Broadway, and we'd be going over his song.
Over Zoom.
Over Zoom, while he's eating his Chinese food before he goes on stage, and he had thrown his neck out, so he's doing this neck exercise. Yeah, I think in this song you could, and it was amazing. It was a great collaboration, and we also had Mark Mancina, who helped glue the whole thing together as he did on Lion King. Great team.
We're running a little long, but
Okay.
I did want to talk a little bit about notes. After you've kind of finished the script, you're going to get notes from all over the place, and they're executive notes. This is Jeffrey Katzenberg, who we mentioned earlier, and he would write notes all over our script, and we also, when we put our movie then up on story reels, and we start running the actual film with story sketches for the staff and for executives, there are more notes, and we encourage notes. We encourage that from everybody, from everybody who works on the movie. After they see a screening, they all write their notes. We read all those notes, and we have offsites and story trusts, and we like notes. Generally, if there are notes that we feel like are good notes, they can really help the movie and make it better. And we like to sort of do that and plus the movie as much as we can. Occasionally, you get notes that you don't like, that you think are going to sort of mess everything up. I remember on The Little Mermaid, and this wasn't Jeffrey, there was a new development executive who had just started as the head of development. And he sent us a few pages of notes, and he said, you've got to start the movie with the mermaid rescuing the prince, and then have her sing the song part of your world after that, not a reprise, the whole song. And then you go on from there. Well, I didn't like that note. Those notes, I thought that would really kind of wreck the movie, so I fought back hard on that.
He's really underplaying what happened. I mean, Peter Schneider, the executive, brought in these notes, which were really Peter's notes, done through his minion, Charlie Fink, and he came into the room, I love these notes, aren't these great notes? And Ron said, Peter, I cannot tell you how much I hate these notes. And Peter ripped them up and threw them all over the room. Fine, I'm not going down with this ship. And he stormed out. And I'm sitting in the next room hearing all this. Like, whoa, this is executive. Yeah, so we got past it, didn't we?
You're combining two different stories. But anyway.
It's Hollywood, Jake.
But actually, I think a good thing about Jeffrey and also John Lasseter and a lot of the people we work with is we could argue with them, and they would listen, and we would listen, and we would go back and forth, and that's kind of part of the process. Even John and I would argue from time to time.
We wouldn't really argue.
No, we did. We argued.
No, we'd have Might be a little disagreement.
I think we argued
I think
a lot.
if you say like a tiff, maybe a little snit.
He's wrong.
No, I don't really think.
Arguments
With a capital A? What do you mean?
My point is arguments are good.
No, I don't feel that way.
It's a good thing, and I
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Yes, we've done this before, but it's a killer.
We also do a bit on talking over each other, but we never talk over each other either.
Anyway,
okay.
The point of the whole thing is that actually I think back to a quote from the great screenwriter Ernest Lehman, who wrote classics like North by Northwest with Alfred Hitchcock, and he said that he attributed his success in the film industry to having lost the right arguments. And there's truth to that. Hopefully the person who's the most passionate will win, and that can really make the movie better.
Well, I do have a caricature that I did 30 years ago when we were doing Aladdin that addressed this topic to a certain extent. It's me as Jafar and Ron as the Sultan, and you will order Jeffrey to make changes only in your sequences. And Ron said, I will order Jeffrey to only, but wait, but Jeffrey makes changes in all the sequences. Never mind. So that was my little moment there. But we have worked with other writers, and it really it's been a boon to us. Sometimes as we get into production, we don't have time to complete necessary rewrites, and other writers come in. Other times, we have story problems that are just following us up, and we can't figure out a solution, and writers come in. Howard Ashman did some great writing for us on Little Mermaid, where he came in, and Michael Eisner had a note that he felt like the crab was dead set against Ariel at the beginning of the movie, and then he's on her side, and he didn't see where he switched allegiances. So Howard rewrote those scenes in the middle where he's yelling at her on the beach, where he says, you're going to come back with me, young lady, and you're going to be just miserable for the rest of your life. All right, I'll help you find that prince. What a soft shell I'm turning out to be. Howard wrote that, and it was great to really put it on stage, where it is that he goes from one thing to the other. He also rewrote the ending, where we had, when the King Triton is seeing Ariel on the rock with the prince, our line originally was Triton said, that human saved my life, because in that plot version, he did kind of save his life. And Howard said, no, that is wrong. That's not the story you're telling. That's if you were to be telling a story about prejudice. You're telling about a story about a father having to give up his daughter, so you've got to reorient. So he rewrote that scene, so that whole thing where, Crab says, children got to be free to lead their own lives, like I always say, and then King says, well, there's just one problem left, how much I'm going to miss her, and he turns her human. That came from Howard, and Howard so beautifully wrote that, so it's subtext, not text, but it's the key moment in the film. But I do want to also point out, this caricature I did that's Howard on the right, that's Ron and I back in the day. Note especially the caricature of Ron on the left, because recently it reappeared. Ron was just in Rome, where he won an award at the Romix Festival. Let's hear it for Ron.
It's kind of, yes. Yes, I flew all the way to Rome to get my award. It was kind of Romix is kind of Rome's version of Comic-Con, where they have a lot of presentations and also a lot of other things.
Yeah, so while he was there, Ron discovered that an Italian model had body painted that caricature, my caricature on her back. Did she ask me? No. And you should see the other side. I mean, it really is okay. But
it
you can see Ron's expression.
It was Rome. Rome is a little different than
when in Rome, paint as the Romans do. So on Aladdin, we worked with these great writers, Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who later created the whole Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. They did wonderful things for us on this film. They were sort of young guys at the time, but they had suggested to us that we should have just a limit of three.
We got into a lot of trouble on Aladdin. Our first version, when we put the story reels up, Jeffrey wanted us to start over.
Yeah, and we were in production at that point. It was a year and a half before the movie came out. He said, start over. And we didn't really want to start over. We didn't ultimately start over, but we did a lot of new things. And one of the new things was something based on what they said, which they felt, instead of having unlimited wishes, which we had in the original version, they thought it should just be limited wishes. There should only be 3 wishes, because that raises the stakes. And then that third wish becomes really crucial. What are you going to do with that wish? And the other way, we were worried, though, that it would limit the fantasy too much in the movie, where we want all these amazing things to happen. And they came, and I think both them and us came up with the idea of, well, if he wishes to be a prince, that can be an umbrella wish, where you get elephants, you get dancing girls, you get monkeys, you get all that under one wish. So you're not wishing for a million things. So we still were able to make it work.
And they came up with the idea, because we thought, well, they're going to use they're going to use one wish to get out of the cave they were in, and they said, no, we can have them trick the genie. So so that really isn't a wish. So that was their solution.
That was Ted and Terry, yeah. We worked with Rob Edwards on Treasure Planet, wonderful writer, we had read some scripts of his from TV, and then he worked with us on The Princess and the Frog and brought a great, it's hard to imagine us, but we are two white guys from the Midwest, and actually Rob's from Detroit originally, but he brought a great sensibility to it, and a lot of Tiana's father, and the warmth of that story, and her drive was influenced by what Rob added to the script. On Moana, we worked with this man, Taika Waititi, the great Taika Waititi. Yes, let's hear it for Taika. Brilliant story artist. We wanted to work with a writer who was from the area, and one of our advisors, Dion Finotti, said, well, Taika's this great Maori writer, and he's directed and written these films, Boy, and other things which we liked. We invited him out. He wound up writing our treatment.
At that time, he was doing Old Navy commercials.
Yeah, he was directing Old Navy commercials. And so he came out, he wrote our first treatment and our first script, and then he really wanted to get back to directing, so he didn't remain with the movie, and he went on to do What We Do in the Shadows and Jojo Rabbit and the Thor movies, and it's something, he's had a good life. And speaking of life, what about life after Disney? Part 3, because now we have retired. As Ron said, I retired a little bit before him. And in our retirement, we're still doing things and doing creative things. I did this short film a couple of years ago. Thank you. I'm hip, I'm cool. It's a very cartoony 4-minute film. I did all the character animation in this film. I started as an animator. I wanted to get back to those roots. It's on the festival circuit. You can't find it online. It's still traveling with Ron Diamond's traveling anthology. I am actually working on 2 more right now that I'm trying to do that are, again, hand-drawn, and I'm trying to do all the animation in them. We'll see if it works. Thank you. I hope you'll like them. They're different than this one, but I hope will be fun to watch, or interesting at least. And then I'm also trying to pull together a book of my caricatures that I've done over the years. I've done these thousands of caricatures. So if each one of you would just buy one of those books, I might lose a lot less money than I'm going to lose.
Speaking of books, in my retirement, I retired about 5 years ago, and I've written a book that actually comes out next summer. It's called Making Disney Magic from a Mermaid to Moana, and it has a foreword by this guy, John Musker, and several of his caricatures of me that he has a tradition of doing humiliating caricatures of me.
It's the finest tradition.
It's a great tradition, and there are many of them within this book. So I hope people.
I have actually read it. It's a terrific book, and I think you'll all enjoy it. Any of you fans of Disney, and it really is his memoir. It talks about his life, and you wouldn't believe some of these stories, but I won't spoil it for you.
Yeah, it's a memoir about 45 years at Disney, and also more recently, I've kind of returned to Disney animation on a part-time basis. I'm working a couple days a week now, going back to the studio as kind of a mentor and helping a little with story development. So that's where we are.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, I am mentoring at Chapman University, if any of the Chapman students are here. Yes, Chapman people, I see you down there. I've been doing that for a couple of years. It's been a lot of fun and a lot of talent there, and it's great to just sort of try and pass along a few bits along the way and to get inspired by their youthful exuberance once again, so that's fantastic. And that's sort of our show, and we have like 5 minutes. Maybe we could do some questions, maybe, if we can just, yeah, go ahead.
So is it, so how's it going directing, the project for Warner Brothers?
That's an unfortunate story. If any of you guys are familiar with that, we were developing an idea, Metal Men, based on the DC comic book at Warner's.
We were both fans of the comic when we were growing up. And we're both comic book fans and superhero fans, so this interested us.
But Warner Brothers changed management a few times since we were there, and the more recent management didn't really care for what we were doing, so we're not doing it anymore. So that's the simple answer to that question. But let's move on. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm a visitive artist, and I'm also very passionate about story. I was curious about how you guys went about writing pantomime characters into a script, because you said that those are,
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's hard. It's really hard. A lot of writers don't want to do it, and because of that, the scripts can kind of not really give them their fair share. I think, coming from animation, we try to do it, and the way to do it is obviously text. Although the one trick is to give them lines that they project.
That are what their attitude
yeah,
is.
So you can actually write dialogue in the script that they would say if they could talk, but they have to sort of express it their own way because they can't talk.
Yeah.
Like if Aladdin is telling Jasmine about how rich he is and how his servants have servants that go to the marketplace for him, and then the carpet goes, "Oh, brother." I mean, that's kind of how you do it.
But then it comes alive in the storyboards. It really is the boards that then and then the animation even more so.
More so in animation.
But so you have to have executives that are willing to give you rope that won't get it when they read it. Even when we wrote Little Mermaid the first time, we had notes from executives who said, she drops out of the story in the middle because she lost her voice. And
well, even that said, this can't work because you have a heroine who doesn't speak.
It's impossible, yeah.
But you can. She did lose her voice, and it was okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Alicia. I wanted to know how do you come up with ideas? What inspires you?
Well, there's all kinds of ways. I think one way that we've done with a lot of our movies when we finish the movie, and we don't usually know what we're going to do after we finish a movie, but when we start, we just kind of brainstorm. We do a lot of brainstorming. I like to write on a legal pad numbers from 1 to 100 and just come up with 100 ideas. And it doesn't matter if they're any good or how stupid or how bad they are, just trying to come up with 100 ideas. And then after that, kind of look that over and say, are any of these any good? And maybe you'll find one or two that, I think pretty good.
It could be intimidating to try and find the perfect story and the perfect this or that, but if you allow yourself to explore a little bit without trying to censor yourself, you may discover something that you didn't anticipate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Jacob, and I know we were talking about villains during the panel, and I was wondering, how did you approach John Silver, who's not really more of like a straightforward villain, more of a complex, almost anti-hero type villain.
Right.
But also, second part, would you be able to, where'd she go? Me and my partner, would you be able to sign our books after?
Yeah, when we leave, we might be able to sign things out there for people, so,
Thank you.
With Silver, it was an interesting character because he's in the gray area, kind of morally conflicted. He's sort of a bad guy, good guy, and he's a bad guy who does something redeeming and helps Jim and becomes sort of a father figure to him. We always saw it as a father-son story. But it was a challenge to find that balance. If he's too evil, that's not good, but if he's too good, then you don't have the dichotomy that makes him the rich character that's in Stevenson's novel. It really is in the novel itself. So that was fun for us to write. I think somebody that sort of walked that line. That it was
a very different sort of villain. A conflicted villain.
Yeah. But it's a challenge.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jacob.
Hi, my name is Jessica, and I was just wondering if, when you're developing a story, do you keep the characters in mind where the story goes, or do you think that the characters have changed the story as you go on writing it more?
I mean, that's a really good question, and at the heart of it, I think that's one of the hardest things is balancing, because I'd say in a bad story, you can have a bad story two ways. One way, you can have a bad story with great characters, but they don't want to do the things that the story is kind of forcing them to do, or you have a plot, or basically you have a plot that requires characters that aren't strong. So you go back and forth. I think it's you try to work them together so that your personalities and your characters, that in an ideal universe, and it's really, really hard, but if in an ideal universe you want to feel like if you put these personalities together and just add an inciting incident, the story has to happen. It's almost going to play out automatically, like it has to play out the way it plays out. that's kind of perfection, but that's the goal.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Pietro's going to say something here, right? No? Okay, all right.
Hello, I'm Iffy. I'm a story artist from Orlando, and I had a question about the research phase.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I was thinking of the Book of Mormon there. Yeah, okay.
I had a question about the research page. I love it. I love it a little too much. So, like, left to my own devices, I'd spend all my time researching. So I was wondering, especially when you're working on your own projects without like external deadlines, how do you find that stopping point where you have like enough?
That's a challenge because, yeah, we worked in a studio system where there are deadlines, and you only have a fixed amount of time to do something, so you're always working against that. When you're now in our retirement, we have our own projects, and that's hard because I try not to create deadlines because I've lived with deadlines so long, and yet I need them just like anybody else does because things will go on, and I'll never get things done. And I set some artificial ones, like by the end of the year, I want to have this, this, and this done. I sort of create some things that I miss most of, but at least I have a target that I know, okay, I got to catch up a little bit. But it's a challenge. Ron, do you have something on that?
No, I would just agree. Deadlines are good, I think, and like I say, we've maybe been lucky in that we've kind of always had them, but even if you don't have them, make them.
Yeah.
That's very fair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hello.
Hi, I'm Rin. I'm a story artist. And I was curious how you guys handled, you mentioned briefly executive notes and critique, and I was wondering how you dealt with maybe things you didn't exactly want to do, plans that went astray without like losing your energy.
I know.
And
There's sometimes
enthusiasm.
the executive gives you a grenade. They throw a grenade in the room. That's not a good note. Yeah,
the thing I would recommend, and I know it's hard, like I say, I think pushing back on Mermaid and then having the movie turn out well kind of helped us a lot after that. But I would not recommend sort of executing a note that you hate, because if it's gonna, if the project doesn't do well, that's not good for anybody. But it feels like even if you find a way around a note or you find a way to make things better that aren't exactly addressing the note, if things turn out well, it never comes back to you. Everybody's happy if things work. So the only I could say is best is to if you really get notes that you feel like this I lose all, but sometimes I think we've got notes where we felt like if we do this note, I don't want to make this movie anymore. And if you feel that way, you should never, I think, find a way around it.
I would think on the flip side of that sometimes, though, sometimes executives give notes and they give solutions, and their solutions are bad, but the underlying note is legitimate. There is a problem, their solution isn't good, and so we would sometimes say that, you've identified this problem, here's another way to solve that problem. And in a way, I feel like stories, I compare them to roofs, because I've had trouble with leaky roofs in the past, and sometimes there's a leak in your roof, but the water comes in over here, but the leak is over there. And that's the way stories can be. There's a problem right here, but really it's because the setup isn't right or the payoff is wrong or whatever. So you have to evaluate that.
Jeffrey Katzenberg was like that, and he's what was called a hands-on executive, and he gave us a ton of notes. But once he said to us, I think that I'm right about 70% of the time. And that actually gave us...
Yeah, because we go back and say, Jeffrey, this is part of the 30% right here.
You're in the 30%
You're in the
area.
30% range here, Jeffrey. I just want you to know. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thanks for coming.